The twin suns were sinking behind the jagged roofs of the alien city, painting the dusty streets in gold and blood-red light. Merchants were packing their stalls, calling out the last of their sales, while strange, scaled beasts pulled carts of fruit and cloth through the market. The smell of cooked meat and sharp alien spices filled the air, mixing with the faint metallic scent of the desert wind among the crowd. A young alien girl pushed and stumbled forward, her thin arms trembling, her breaths ragged, her small feet slapped against the hot stone, but she didn't stop. Not even when a merchant yelled at her for knocking over his basket of glowing fruits. Her eyes, large, silver, and shining with tears, were locked on the one thing she still had hope in, a human. He stood at a small stall near the end of the market, examining a box of metal parts with calm focus. He was tall, taller than most in the market, and carried himself like someone who had been through too many battles but refused to bend. His clothes were travel-worn, dusty from the road, and his boots had the deep cuts of long journeys on his back. A worn but well-kept rifle hung in a leather strap, and at his hip, a short, curved blade caught the dying light. The girl almost lost her courage when she saw him up close. There was something about humans that felt both warm and dangerous. But then she remembered her sister's terrified face as the raiders dragged her away, and her fear turned into desperate strength. She rushed forward, grabbing the human's arm with both hands. "Mighty human, please," she cried, her voice shaking. "They took my sister. Will you help me save her?" Her words spilled out too fast, tripping over each other. But the human's sharp gaze focused on her instantly. He crouched so they were eye level, his shadow falling over her like a shield. "Who took her?" he asked, his voice low, steady-like. He was trying not to scare her even more. The girl swallowed, her small fangs barely showing as she whispered, "The black-marked raiders. They came from the hills. They take children and sell them." A few merchants nearby turned their heads but quickly looked away. Everyone had heard of the black-marked raiders. They were a cruel band, feared even by armed patrols. The human's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. "How long ago?" he asked. "2 sunsets ago," the girl replied, her voice breaking. "I've been looking for someone. Anyone. But no one will help me." Her gaze darted toward the crowd, where people avoided meeting her eyes, pretending they hadn't heard. The human reached into his pouch and paid the merchant for the metal parts without looking. Then he slung the pouch over his shoulder and stood. "Show me," he said simply. The girl blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "You'll help me?" "I'm not in the habit of leaving kids behind," he replied, his tone as solid as stone. He gestured for her to lead the way. Her heart pounded in her chest as she guided him through the narrow alleys toward the city's edge. The streets grew quieter the farther they went, the air colder. They passed shuttered homes and flickering lamps. At the last row of crumbling stone houses, the city ended, opening into the vast alien desert. The girl pointed to faint claw marks scratched into the dirt. "They came from there. Their mounts leave deep tracks," she explained. The human crouched, studying the marks in silence, running his fingers along the edges. "Fresh enough," he muttered. "They're not too far ahead." The girl hugged herself, shivering despite the heat that still lingered in the sand. "You're not afraid of them?" she asked. The human glanced at her, one corner of his mouth lifting in a small, almost amused smile. "I've met worse," he said. Then his tone turned serious. "But I need you to do exactly as I say, understand?" She nodded quickly, not caring what the instructions would be. If it meant saving her sister, she would agree to anything. The sun's last rays sank below the horizon, and the alien sky deepened into a swirling purple and blue. Far away, a shape moved on the dunes, too small to be a mountain, too steady to be a shadow. The human's eyes sharpened. "Tracking it. They're on the move," he said, his voice almost a growl. He tightened the strap of his rifle and adjusted the blade at his hip. Then he looked down at the girl, his expression calm but firm. "Stay close to me. No matter what happens," he told her, She nodded again, her silver eyes reflecting the rising moons. As they stepped into the desert, the wind picked up, carrying with it the faint sound of drums, slow, heavy beats that echoed like a heartbeat. The girl's breathing quickened, but she stayed beside the human. In that moment, she realized something strange. While the whole city had turned away from her, this stranger, this human, had not hesitated even for a moment. And though she didn't know his name or where he had come from, she felt safer walking into the darkness with him than she ever had before. Little did she know, this night would mark the beginning of a story that would be told in whispers across the planet. A story about the day a single human walked into the black-marked raider's path and refused to walk away without the stolen. And somewhere out there, her sister was still alive, waiting. The desert stretched ahead like an endless sea, but the girl's fear had shifted into something else, hope. The desert wind howled softly as the human and the alien girl moved further from the city's edge. The warm light of the market was now far behind them, replaced by the cold glow of two pale moons hanging above. The sand under their feet shifted and crunched, each step carrying them deeper into the open wasteland. The girl's breathing was quick, her small legs working hard to keep up, but she didn't complain. Her mind was fixed on one thought: her sister was somewhere out here, and every moment they wasted could be the difference between saving her or losing her forever. The human crouched every few minutes, checking the ground for signs. His gloved hand brushed over the sand, feeling for patterns in the dunes. Their deep claw marks, slightly curved, spaced evenly apart. They were here, he said in a calm, low voice. The girl's silver eyes followed his hand. Those are from their mounts, she whispered. Four-legged beasts, fast. They don't stop once they start running. The human's jaw tightened. Then we'll have to move faster. They followed the tracks as the night deepened. The air grew cooler, and the desert began to feel more alive. Small glowing insects darted between dry bushes, and the distant cries of unseen creatures echoed off the dunes. The human moved like he'd crossed countless hostile lands before, his steps quiet, his eyes always scanning ahead. The girl, despite her fear, began to notice how steady he was. Even when the wind kicked up sand and stung their faces, he didn't falter. He seemed unshaken by the darkness, as if danger was something he had long accepted. After nearly an hour, they came to a stretch of cracked, dry ground here. The tracks became harder to follow. Broken rocks and jagged earth covered the trail. The girl's heart sank. I can't see the signs anymore. The human knelt and pressed his palm to the ground, feeling the faint vibrations beneath. They passed here not long ago, he said. The ground still remembers their weight. The girl tilted her head in confusion. You can feel that? The human gave a small smile. When you've hunted long enough, the land talks to you. They moved on, and soon the wind carried a faint smell, burned oil and scorched metal. The human slowed, raising a hand for the girl to stop. Ahead, a faint orange flicker glowed against the horizon. They crept closer, keeping low, until they reached the edge of a ridge. From there, the girl saw a burned-out camp, ashes still smoking. The remains of broken cages lay scattered, their metal bars twisted. The human studied the scene with sharp eyes. Not their main base, he murmured. A rest stop. And they left in a hurry. The girl's hands curled into fists. Maybe my sister was here. The human placed a hand on her shoulder. If she was, she's still with them, he said firmly. And that means we can still reach her. He pointed toward another set of tracks leading away from the camp. These were deeper, pressed hard into the sand, as if the mounts had been pushed to run even faster. They know someone might follow, the human said. That's why we'll move at night, less chance they'll see us coming. The moons rose higher, casting silver light across the dunes. The girl's legs began to ache, but she pushed forward. The human noticed her slowing pace and handed her a small water canister. She drank greedily, the cool liquid easing her dry throat. You'll need your strength, he told her. When we find them, it won't just be watching. You'll have to help me. Her eyes widened. Me? But you're her sister, he interrupted. And you're the reason I'm out here. That makes you part of this fight. The words sank into her, planting a spark of courage she didn't know she had. For the first time since her sister was taken, she felt like she wasn't just running, she was fighting to get her back. They walked in silence for a while, the only sounds their footsteps and the soft rush of the wind. Every so often, the human would stop, listen, and then adjust their path slightly. The girl realized he was avoiding open areas and choosing routes that kept them hidden among dunes and rock formations. He was not only following the trail, he was making sure they would reach the raiders without being spotted. After another stretch of walking, they came across something half buried in the sand. The human brushed it free, revealing a small strip of fabric, torn and frayed. The girl gasped, recognizing it instantly. That's from her dress. She clutched it to her chest, her eyes filling with tears. The human nodded once. We're close, he said, and his pace quickened. Her heart pounded not from fear this time, but from hope. The wind shifted again, and this time they heard it, a faint, rhythmic pounding. It wasn't the drums from before, but the sound of hooves, heavy and fast. The human dropped to one knee, pulling the girl down beside him. It peeked over a dune, and in the distance, shadowy shapes moved under the moonlight. Dark riders, hunched and armored, their mounts galloping across the sand. Between them, the faint outline of a cage swayed on a sled pulled by two beasts. The girl's breath caught. That has to be them. The human's eyes locked on the cage, his expression sharpening. They're moving toward the northern cliffs, he said. If they reach the pass, it will be harder to catch them. He looked at the girl, his tone low but certain. We'll follow until they stop, and when they do, that's when we take your sister back. The girl nodded, clutching the piece of torn fabric in her hands. Somewhere ahead, her sister was alive, and now there was a human willing to walk into the jaws of danger to bring her home. The desert night seemed endless, but their path was set. And as they began their silent pursuit, the girl realized this was no longer just her fight. It was theirs. Together. The desert night was cold, but the air around them felt tense and heavy. The human and the alien girl had been following the raiders for hours, always keeping far enough to stay hidden. The rhythmic pounding of the mounts had grown fainter as the riders moved faster. But the human never lost track. Every few dunes he would stop, crouch, and point out signs the girl could barely see. Shallow depressions in the sand, broken twigs from rare desert shrubs, and even faint drops of black liquid from the raiders' supply barrels. He moved like a hunter who had done this many times before, silent and patient. The girl, though exhausted, felt a strange trust in him, like no matter how dangerous the path became, he would find a way forward. Eventually, the land began to change. The open dunes gave way to scattered rock formations that rose like jagged teeth from the ground. Shadows stretched long across the sand, and the human slowed his steps. They're close, he whispered, his voice barely louder than the wind. The girl's silver eyes scanned ahead, but she couldn't see anything except darkness between the rocks. Where? She asked softly. He nodded toward a faint flicker of light far in the distance, orange flames dancing against the stone. They've stopped for the night, he said. That's their camp. The girl's breath caught in her throat. Her heart beat faster as she thought of her sister. Was she in that camp now? Scared and alone? The human crouched low and gestured for her to do the same. They moved silently, weaving between the rocks, the sand muffling their footsteps with each step. The firelight grew brighter, and soon they began to hear faint sounds, rough voices speaking in a harsh, guttural language. The girl shivered, recognizing the tone even if she couldn't understand the words. They're laughing, she whispered bitterly, like they haven't done anything wrong. The human's expression darkened, but he said nothing when they finally reached the edge of a cliff that overlooked part of the camp. The girl's breath hitched. Below them, a cluster of tents and crude shelters surrounded several roaring fires. The raiders' mounts, huge, four-legged beasts with spiked tails, were tied to posts. Their eyes glowing faintly in the dark, figures moved between the fires. Their armor black and marked with strange white symbols. Some sat sharpening blades, while others guarded a group of small cages near the center of the camp. The girl leaned forward, scanning desperately for her sister. Her eyes darted from cage to cage, but she couldn't be sure in the shifting firelight. The human studied the camp with sharp focus. He pointed to the cages. "That's where they keep the captives," he murmured. "But there are too many guards to rush in." He traced the edges of the camp with his eyes, noting the gaps between patrols. Two blind spots. One near the supply tents, the other behind the mounts, he said, almost to himself. The girl looked at him nervously. "What are you thinking?" He gave her a faint, steady smile. "I'm thinking I'll get in through the shadows, find your sister and get her out." Her eyes widened. "Alone?" "It'll be faster," he replied. "You'll stay here. If anything goes wrong, you run toward the city, don't look back." The girl's hands balled into fists. "But no arguments," he said firmly. "If they catch you, they'll use you to make me stop." She swallowed hard but nodded reluctantly before leaving. The human took a small piece of cloth from his pouch and handed it to her. "If I'm not back before the second moon is above us, leave," he said. She clutched the cloth like a promise, watching as he disappeared into the darkness. The human moved like a shadow, sliding down the slope and keeping low. He waited in the dark as a guard passed by, then darted to the next cover, a half-buried crate. From there, he worked his way toward the cages, always timing his steps with the noise of the camp to hide the sound. Once, a raider almost spotted him when a loose stone rolled under his boot. The human froze, gripping the hilt of his blade, ready to strike if needed. But the guard turned away, distracted by laughter from another fire. He crept closer. Close enough now to hear the frightened whimpers of the captives. A young alien boy gripped the bars of a cage, his eyes wide with fear. The human whispered softly, "Quiet," and the boy's gaze shifted from fear to surprise. The human scanned each cage quickly, searching for the girl's sister, but she wasn't there. His stomach sank. Someone tugged at his sleeve. It was the boy, pointing toward the largest tent at the center of the camp. The human understood immediately. The leader must be keeping her there. He gave the boy a reassuring nod, then melted back into the shadows. His mind worked fast. Getting into the leader's tent would be risky, but leaving without the sister was not an option. He slipped behind the supply tents, using the flickering shadows from the fires to stay hidden. Through a narrow gap between two crates, he caught a glimpse inside the leader's tent. Chains glinted in the dim light, and he thought he saw a small figure sitting on the ground, motionless. Before he could move closer, two heavily armed guards stepped into view, blocking the entrance. The human's eyes narrowed. He would need to take them out silently and fast before anyone noticed. The night air grew still, the camp noises fading into the background as he prepared himself. He was deep inside enemy territory now, with no room for mistakes. Somewhere behind him, the alien girl waited on the cliff, clutching the cloth he had given her, praying he would return. And somewhere ahead, just beyond those guards, her sister waited in chains. The human's fingers tightened around his blade. It was time to act. The human's breath was steady. His eyes locked on the two guards standing before the leader's tent. They were tall, heavily built, with curved shoulder armor painted in white bone patterns. Each carried a long spear tipped with something that glimmered faintly in the firelight. Poison. Maybe. The human knew he couldn't let them raise an alarm. One shout and the whole camp would be awake. He crouched low, fingers curling around the hilt of his blade. The sound of the wind and the distant crackle of the campfires covered his first steps. The first guard turned slightly, his gaze moving toward the fire pit. That was the moment the human moved. He shot forward silently, his arm wrapping around the guard's neck while the blade pressed under the armor. The alien froze, a strangled gasp escaping before the human eased him to the ground without a sound. The second guard blinked, confused at the sudden movement. Before he could react, the human lunged one swift strike to the side of the neck. The alien's spear clattered softly onto the sand, and he fell without a cry. The human dragged both bodies into the shadow of the tent. Every second mattered. He pushed aside the flap of the tent just enough to slip inside. The air smelled of stale smoke and metal. A single lantern swung above, casting long shadows across the rugs. At the far end, chained to a post, sat a small alien girl, her silver eyes wide and frightened. Her clothes were torn, and her wrists were rubbed raw from the chains. When she saw him, she flinched at first, then froze, unsure if he was friend or foe. The human crouched and put a finger to his lips. Her breathing slowed, and she gave the faintest nod. He moved to the chains, examining the lock. It was crude but strong, from a pouch on his belt. He pulled a thin piece of metal and worked quickly. The lock clicked, and the chains fell with a dull clink. "You're safe now," he whispered. The girl hesitated only for a second before throwing her arms around him. He let her cling to him for a moment, then lifted her into his arms. They had to move before someone noticed the missing guards. He stepped outside, his eyes scanning the camp. For a few precious seconds, everything was still. Then a sharp voice rang out from somewhere near the cages. One of the patrolling raiders had spotted the bodies in the shadows. The alarm cry ripped through the night. Almost instantly, the camp exploded into motion. Raiders shouting, weapons clanging, mounts screeching. The human ran, cradling the girl in one arm while his free hand drew his rifle. A bolt of blue plasma whizzed past his head, striking the sand with a hiss. He returned fire, the shot hitting a raider square in the chest. The girl buried her face against him, her small hands gripping his shirt tightly. He moved fast, weaving between tents, using them as cover from the barrage of plasma bolts everywhere. The camp was alive with movement, dark shapes darting across the fires, shadows stretching and breaking as raiders closed in. Two rushed at him from the side, their blades flashing. He swung the butt of his rifle into the first one's jaw, sending him crashing to the ground. The second lunged, but the human twisted away, kicking his legs out from under him. More were coming, their shouts echoing through the camp. The human spotted a narrow gap between the supply tents, just wide enough for him to slip through. He darted toward it, but a massive raider stepped into his path. This one wore heavier armor, and his weapon was a jagged, double-bladed axe. The human lowered the rescued girl to her feet, putting himself between her and the threat. The raider roared and charged, swinging the axe with enough force to split a tree. The human ducked, feeling the wind of the blade pass over his head. With a quick step forward, he drove his elbow into the raider's ribs, followed by a hard strike to the helmet. The alien stumbled back, dazed, and the human finished the fight with a clean sweep of his leg. Dropping the raider to the ground, he grabbed the girl again, pulling her through the narrow gap. They emerged near the edge of the camp, but the sounds of pursuit were close behind. The human could hear the thundering footsteps of several raiders giving chase. He fired 2 quick shots over his shoulder, forcing them to scatter. The girl pointed toward the cliffs, her voice trembling. "My sister is up there waiting." The human's heart tightened. He had to reach her before the raiders cut them off. They raced toward the outer rocks, sand spraying beneath their feet. A mounted raider tried to block their path, his beast roaring as it lunged. The human sidestepped, grabbing the creature's reins and yanking hard. The beast reared, throwing its rider into the sand. Without slowing, the human leapt over the fallen raider and pushed onward. The edge of the camp was just ahead, lit faintly by the moons. Shouts grew fainter behind them, but he knew they weren't safe yet. Once they reached the rocks, he paused just long enough to look back. The camp was in chaos, fires burning brighter, raiders running in every direction. But many were still following, their armor glinting in the moonlight. The human met the rescued girl's eyes, his voice calm despite the danger. "We're almost there." Don't let go. And with that, he started the climb toward the ridge where the alien girl, the sister, was waiting. Every muscle in his body burned. But he kept moving. Somewhere above, she would see them coming, and she would know her sister was alive, but she would also see that the fight was far from over. The human had almost reached the ridge when a deep rumbling voice echoed from behind. It was not the panicked shouting of the raiders chasing them. This was heavier, colder. He turned slightly, and through the haze of firelight and drifting sand, the leader of the black-marked raiders stepped into view. The alien was massive, a full head taller than any of his warriors. His armor carved with jagged scars from countless battles. A long black cloak dragged behind him, and in his hands was a massive blade with edges that shimmered under the moons. The rescued girl gasped and clung to the human's arm, her small voice trembling. That's him. The one who took her. The leader's eyes, a glowing shade of molten gold, locked on the human. You are far from your own kind, Deathworlder, he said, his voice like grinding stone. You dare take what belongs to me. The human shifted his grip on his rifle, keeping his body between the leader and the girl. She doesn't belong to you, he said simply, his tone calm but sharp. The leader tilted his head, studying the human like one might study prey before striking. Then he laughed, a low and dangerous sound. You have spirit. It will not save you. The leader raised his sword, the motion slow and deliberate, as if to show he wasn't in a hurry. The human quickly glanced up toward the ridge. The older sister, the one who had begged for his help, was there, peering over the rocks, her eyes wide with shock and hope. She could see her sister alive, but also the towering figure blocking their escape. The human met her gaze for a heartbeat, then turned back to the leader. You want to fight? The human said, Fine, but understand if I win, every child you've taken walks free. The leader smirked, revealing rows of sharp, predatory teeth. If you win, I will let you walk away with your life. But you will not win. They began to circle each other, the sand crunching softly under their boots. The rescued girl hid behind a boulder, her eyes darting between them. The leader struck first. A heavy, downward swing that would have cleaved the human in two, but the human sidestepped, the blade smashing into the sand, sending grains spraying like sparks. The human countered with a quick slash from his short blade, aiming for the leader's side. But the alien's armor took most of the impact, the metal ringing out with a dull clang. The leader moved fast for his size, swinging his massive sword in a wide arc. The human ducked, feeling the rush of air above his head, and rolled to the side. He came up on one knee, firing his rifle at the leader's exposed shoulder. The bolt struck true, burning a smoking line across the alien's armor. The leader snarled, not badly hurt, but angry now. He charged, and their blades clashed. The sound was sharp, echoing in the empty desert night. The human was quicker, using precise movements to force the leader to swing wildly. But every time the alien's sword connected with the human's blade, the sheer strength behind it rattled his arms. One mistake, one wrong step, and the fight would end in a single blow. The human changed tactics. He feinted left, then dropped low, kicking sand in the leader's face. The alien roared in fury, blinded for a moment. The human took the chance to strike at the back of the leader's knee, the blade biting through the gap in the armor. The massive alien stumbled, falling to one knee. The human stepped in, pressing his blade to the leader's throat. Call them off, the human said, his voice steady but fierce. Now, for a long moment, the leader's glowing eyes burned into his. Then a slow, dangerous smile spread across the alien's face. You think this is over? He growled. Before the human could react, the leader twisted with surprising speed, slamming his armored elbow into the human's ribs. The air rushed out of his lungs, and the leader surged back to his feet, swinging again. The human barely managed to block, the force driving him back several steps. From the ridge, the alien sister cried out, Please, don't stop, you can beat him. Her voice cut through the tension. and the human steadied himself. The leader came at him again, but this time the human ducked under the swing, stepping inside the alien's guard. He drove the hilt of his blade into the leader's jaw, followed by a sharp elbow strike to the chest. The alien staggered, his grip on the sword faltering. The human grabbed the weapon's handle and wrenched it from his hands. Tossing it into the sand, the leader reached for him. But the human's knee came up hard into his chest. The alien fell to the ground, gasping for breath. The human stood over him, blade ready. "Your raids end tonight," he said firmly. "If I ever hear of you taking another child, I will find you again." The leader glared up at him, but for the first time, there was hesitation in his eyes. With a sharp motion, the human turned and grabbed the rescued girl, pulling her toward the ridge. The older sister scrambled down to meet them, tears streaming as she took her sibling into her arms. The human gave them only a moment before urging them upward. Below, the leader slowly rose to his feet, his voice carrying in the wind. "This is not the end, human," he roared, but he made no move to follow. The human didn't look back. For now, the sisters were together again, and that was the only victory that mattered. The human didn't slow down, not even after the leader's voice faded into the night. He knew better than to think the fight was over. The black-marked raiders would not simply let them walk away. The desert was too open, too exposed if they didn't put enough distance between themselves and the camp. The raiders would be on them again before dawn. The older sister held her sibling tightly as they climbed over the ridge. The younger one was shaking, her small fingers gripping her sister's clothes. The human moved ahead, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The moons hung low now, bathing the sand in a pale glow. Every shadow looked like it could be hiding something. Every gust of wind seemed to carry the sound of pursuit. They reached the other side of the ridge and slid down into a narrow valley between two long dunes. The human stopped there for a moment. Crouching low, "Stay here," he whispered. "Don't make a sound." The sisters nodded, their eyes wide with fear. The human crept forward, climbing halfway up the dune to get a view of the land behind them. And there it was, the faint glimmer of armor in the moonlight. Several dark shapes moving quickly over the sand. The raiders had regrouped, and they were closing the distance fast. The human's jaw tightened. "They're coming," he said as he slid back down. "We have to move now." The valley funneled into a rocky stretch of desert, where scattered boulders offered some cover. The human led the sisters through it at a fast pace, his boots making almost no sound on the sand. Behind them, the sound of pounding feet and the snarls of the raiders' mounts grew louder. One of the beasts let out a high, piercing cry, a signal to the others. The human glanced back just in time to see a mounted raider break from the group, aiming to cut them off. "Run!" he ordered. The sisters sprinted ahead while he turned to face the charging mount. The massive creature bore down on him, jaws snapping. At the last moment, the human sidestepped and grabbed the reins, twisting them hard. The beast let out startled roar, stumbling to the side and throwing its rider into the sand. The human didn't wait to finish the fight. He sprinted after the sisters. They reached a narrow pass between two towering rock walls. "This way," he said, guiding them through. The walls rose high enough to block the moonlight, plunging the path into shadow. The sound of the raiders' pursuit echoed off the stone, making it hard to tell how close they really were. The younger sister tripped, falling hard onto her knees. Before she could cry out, a human scooped her up and kept running. Halfway through the pass, he stopped suddenly, setting the girl down. "What's wrong?" the older sister whispered, panic in her voice. The human's eyes scanned the rocks above them. "This place is too tight for their mounts," he said quietly. "That means they'll try to come through on foot. And that means we can slow them down." He began quickly gathering loose stones from the ground, placing them in a pile. Then he took out a small cylindrical object from his belt and pressed it against the rock wall. The older sister tilted her head. "What is that?" "A charge," he replied. "Small, but loud enough to make them think twice about following." He set 2 more further down the pass, then waved the sisters forward. When you hear a bang, keep running and don't look back. The pounding of feet grew louder. Shouts in the raiders' guttural language filled the narrow space. The human waited until they were close, then hit the detonator. The charge exploded with a deafening boom, shaking the walls and sending chunks of rock tumbling down. Dust filled the air, and the screams of startled raiders echoed behind them. The human didn't wait to see the damage. He grabbed the younger sister's hand and urged them forward. They burst out of the pass into the open desert once more. The horizon ahead was beginning to pale. Dawn was not far. The human knew the raiders would be more cautious now, but they wouldn't stop entirely. They had a reputation to uphold, and letting a human walk away with stolen captives would make them look weak. The older sister looked over her shoulder, her voice shaky. Do you think they'll keep chasing us? Yes, the human said simply, but they've lost their advantage. He pointed toward a cluster of jagged cliffs in the distance. If we reach those before sunrise, we can hide long enough for them to lose our trail. The journey to the cliffs was exhausting. The sisters' legs were weak, their breaths coming in short gasps. The human slowed his pace slightly to keep them together, but never stopped moving. Behind them, the desert stayed quiet, but the silence felt tense like the calm before a storm. At last, they reached the base of the cliffs. The human found a narrow crevice just wide enough for them to slip into, hidden from plain sight. Inside it was cool and dark, the sound of the wind muffled by stone. The sisters sank to the ground, clinging to each other. The human remained standing at the entrance, watching the desert for any sign of movement. Minutes passed and then he saw them, small figures on the horizon, scanning the sands. The raiders were still searching, but they were too far now, moving in the wrong direction. The human finally allowed himself to relax, just a little. They're heading the other way, he said quietly. We have time to rest. The older sister looked up at him, her voice soft. Why did you help us? You don't even know us. The human gave a small smile. You asked. No one else did. The sisters exchanged a look, tears in their eyes. For the first time since the raid, they felt something other than fear. They felt safe, but the human knew the journey wasn't over yet. They still had to make it back to the city, and the raiders' leader had made it clear this fight wasn't finished. As dawn's first light touched the cliff walls, the human silently promised himself one thing. If they came again, he would be ready. The first light of dawn slowly spread across the desert, painting the sand in shades of gold and rose. Inside the narrow crevice of the cliffs, the human stood guard while the 2 sisters rested. The younger one was curled up in her sister's arms, finally asleep. The older sister watched the human silently for a while, her silver eyes reflecting the soft light of morning. She didn't know how to thank him, not just for saving her sister, but for not hesitating when everyone else had turned away. When the sun was high enough to warm the rocks, the human spoke quietly. It's time to move. The raiders won't give up completely, but daylight will slow them down. The sisters rose, still tired but ready to follow him. The human led them out of the crevice, scanning the horizon before stepping into the open. The wind carried only the soft hiss of shifting sand, no drums, no hoofbeats. Still, he kept one hand near his weapon, because he knew the desert could turn dangerous in a heartbeat. They walked for hours under the growing heat. The younger sister asked timidly, Are we going home now? The human glanced at her and gave a small nod. Yes, home. The word made her smile for the first time since they'd met. The older sister held her sibling's hand tightly, afraid to let go even for a moment. By midday, the jagged shapes of the city's walls appeared on the horizon. The sight made both sisters quicken their steps, but the human slowed them down. Don't rush. We need to look like travelers, not fugitives, he explained. The closer they got, the more people appeared along the road, merchants, farmers, and traders coming in from the desert. Some gave the human curious glances, but no one stopped them. At the city gates, The guards eyed the trio with suspicion. One of them, a tall alien with bronze armor, stepped forward. "Where did you come from?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the human. "From the east," the human said calmly. "The roads are clear now." The guard's gaze shifted to the sisters, who clung to the human's sides. He frowned, as if he wanted to ask more questions, but the human's steady, unflinching stare made him think twice. With a short wave, the guard let them pass. Inside the city, the streets were alive with noise and color. Merchants shouted prices, children ran between stalls, and the smell of spiced food drifted through the air. But for the sisters, it felt different now, safer. Warmer because they weren't alone. The older sister led the way toward a small district near the western wall. "This is where we live," she said softly. "Our home is small, but it's ours." When they reached it, the human paused at the doorway. The house was humble stone walls, a single wooden door, and a small garden with alien herbs, but it was solid and safe. The older sister turned to him, her voice trembling. I don't know how to thank you." "You already did," he said simply. "You trusted me." The younger sister suddenly stepped forward, throwing her arms around his waist. "Don't go," she whispered, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Stay with us." The human placed a gentle hand on her head. "I can't stay," he said softly. "But I'll be nearby if you ever need me." The older sister bit her lip, looking like she wanted to argue, but instead she nodded slowly. She understood people like him didn't belong in one place for long. They were always moving, always looking for the next fight that needed to be fought. Before leaving, the human reached into his pouch and pulled out a small metal pendant shaped like a star. He pressed it into the younger sister's hand. "If you ever feel unsafe, hold on to this. It will remind you that you're never alone." She clutched it tightly, her eyes wide with wonder. The older sister watched the exchange, her heart swelling with gratitude. The human stepped back onto the street, giving them one last look. The morning sun lit his figure as he walked away, blending into the crowd until he was just another traveler among many. The sisters stood in the doorway for a long time, watching until they couldn't see him anymore. Later that day, word began to spread in the market. Stories whispered from merchant to merchant. A human had faced the black-marked raiders and lived. A human had freed captives and walked out of the desert without fear. Some said he had defeated their leader in single combat. Others claimed he had fought an entire camp alone. The details changed with each telling, but one thing stayed the same. They called him the mighty human, and they spoke his name with respect. Back at their home, the sisters sat together. The younger one played with the star pendant, holding it up so it caught the afternoon light. The older one smiled faintly, thinking of the moment in the market when she had grabbed his arm and begged for help. She had not known then if he would say yes, but he had without hesitation, and because of that, her sister was safe. As night fell, the city lights flickered to life. Somewhere beyond the walls, the black-marked raiders were nursing their wounds. Their leader would remember the human's face, and perhaps, one day, he would come looking for revenge. But for now, the sisters slept peacefully, knowing that if the day ever came, the mighty human would be ready, and far away, under the starlit desert sky. The human walked alone, his boots pressing into the sand, his eyes scanning the horizon for the next place where he might be needed. The wind carried with it the faintest sound of laughter, two voices, young and free. It was all the reward he needed, because some promises once made could never be broken.